You know the moment I am describing, you have lived it more than once. The opportunity appears, and with it, the obstacle. The path forward is visible, but it is steep, uncertain, shrouded in difficulty. And a voice arises within you, reasonable, measured, thoroughly sensible, counseling caution. Wait for better conditions. Preserve your resources. The timing is not quite right. You listen to this voice. You call it wisdom. You retreat. And later, sometimes much later, you discover that someone else walked the path you abandoned. Someone with less talent, fewer resources, inferior position. They succeeded not because they were better than you, but because they were present when you were absent, advancing when you were retreating, pushing against the gate whilst you concluded it was a wall. This is not misfortune. This is mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, you shall never again mistake retreat for wisdom. The difficulty you face at this moment is not your enemy. It is your ally, doing your work for you, clearing the field of competitors who lack your understanding. Whilst they flee, positions open. Whilst they hesitate, opportunities accumulate. Whilst they wait for the storm to pass, you might sail through it to harbors they shall never reach. The choice is before you now. It has always been before you. What follows shall ensure you finally see it clearly. There is a great deception abroad in the world, and it has claimed more victims than any plague or pestilence known to history. It moves among men dressed in the respectable garments of prudence and good judgment. It speaks in the measured tones of careful deliberation. It wears the very mask of wisdom itself. And yet it is a lie. I speak of retreat disguised as strategy. I speak of surrender wrapped in the language of patience. I speak of the comfortable fiction that stepping back preserves one's position, that waiting for better conditions constitutes intelligent planning, that hesitation is the hallmark of the thoughtful man. This is the great deception, and until you recognize it for what it is, you shall remain its prisoner. Consider carefully. When you decline to act, what words do you employ? You speak of timing. You invoke prudence. You mention the wisdom of waiting until conditions are more favorable, until resources are more abundant, until the path ahead is more clearly marked. These words sound reasonable. They carry the weight of centuries of supposed wisdom. But strip away the comfortable language, and what remains? Fear, nothing more. I recall a young officer in India who possessed every quality required for distinction. His mind was sharp, his bearing excellent, his education complete. Yet he advanced not 1 inch in 5 years, whilst his contemporaries rose steadily past him. His superiors praised his careful judgment and his measured approach. Upon closer examination, I discovered the truth. He had declined 3 opportunities for action, each time citing reasonable concerns about risk, timing, or circumstance. His fellow officers, less gifted but more willing to advance into uncertainty, had risen to positions he might have occupied. He was not exercising wisdom. He was exercising fear dressed as wisdom. The moment he recognized this distinction, everything changed. Within 18 months, his career had transformed utterly. You see, the human mind possesses a remarkable capacity for self-deception. We construct elaborate justifications for our failures of nerve, and we believe these justifications with the fervor of true conviction. We tell ourselves stories of strategic patience, when the truth is simply that we lacked courage. We invoke the language of careful planning when we are merely postponing the discomfort of action. The more elaborate the justification, the more certain you may be that it conceals retreat. Let me offer you a test by which you may examine your own decisions. When you find yourself inclined toward caution, write down your reasons for waiting. Then ask of each reason this simple question: is this a specific strategic calculation with a definite timeline, or is this a comfortable excuse that could apply indefinitely? True strategy has parameters. It has a return date. It has specific conditions that must be met, and a clear deadline by which they must materialize. But spiritual retreat has none of these. It speaks only in vague promises of when the time is right and when conditions improve. If you cannot name the precise circumstances under which you would act and the date by which those circumstances must arrive, you are not being strategic. You are retreating. There is another dimension to this deception that must be understood. Every retreat carries hidden costs that accumulate compound interest against your future. The position you abandon today becomes another man's fortress tomorrow. The opportunity you decline passes to hands more willing to receive it. Time does not pause whilst you gather your courage. The world moves on, and each moment of hesitation widens the gap between where you stand and where you might have been. But the deepest cost is not external. The man who retreats loses not merely his objective, but a portion of his belief in himself. Each withdrawal makes the next withdrawal easier. The habit strengthens with every exercise. What begins as occasional caution becomes, by degrees, permanent paralysis. A man's life becomes a long succession of abandoned positions and surrendered ground, and he wonders why fortune never favors him. I must be clear on one point, for I do not wish to be misunderstood. All caution is not weakness. There are times when genuine strategic withdrawal serves a larger advance. The distinction is crucial. Such withdrawal has definite parameters, specific objectives, and a clear return. It is not indefinite hesitation masquerading as patience. The error lies not in ever stepping back, but in confusing the temporary tactical movement with the permanent spiritual surrender. Another common error deserves mention: the belief that you can return to abandoned positions whenever you choose. You rarely can. Others occupy them. They fortify them against your return. The landscape shifts whilst you wait, and the man who retreats today may find no ground to stand upon tomorrow. The ground you imagine you are preserving by withdrawal is being claimed by those who advance whilst you hesitate. What then is the remedy? It begins with recognition. When you hear yourself invoking prudence, when you feel the comfortable embrace of waiting for the right moment, a new voice must now ask, is this wisdom or is this fear? This single distinction, once grasped, changes every subsequent decision. I challenge you to take 15 minutes this evening and conduct what I call the retreat inventory. List 3 occasions in the past year when you chose not to act, citing reasonable caution. For each, write honestly. What was the true reason beneath the comfortable explanation? What did that retreat cost you? What position does another now occupy that might have been yours? This exercise strips away comfortable illusions. It reveals the pattern that governs your decisions, and patterns, once seen, can be broken. You possess now what most lack: the ability to recognize retreat's disguises. You can no longer deceive yourself with comfortable language, for you have seen behind the mask. When the lie that wears the mask of wisdom next approaches you, speaking its reasonable words of caution and delay, you shall know it for what it is. And knowing, you shall choose differently. Having stripped away the comfortable deception that retreat constitutes wisdom, we must now address a deeper question. If resistance is not a message to stop, what is it? The answer shall transform how you interpret every obstacle you encounter for the remainder of your days. The universe does not construct barriers to keep men out. It constructs barriers to determine who is worthy of entry. What appears to be a wall barring your progress is, in truth, a gate that opens only to those who push against it long enough. Resistance is not rejection. Resistance is selection. Consider this carefully, for it inverts everything you have been taught to believe. When difficulty arrives, the ordinary man reads it as a message. Stop. Turn back. This path is not for you. He accepts the wall at face value as though it were final, as though its purpose were his exclusion. And accepting this interpretation, he retreats. But the champion reads the same difficulty as an entirely different message. He sees the wall, and he understands its true function. He thinks, the sorting has begun. Most will now leave. My moment approaches. You see, every field of significant achievement is protected by what appears to be obstruction, but functions as examination. If entry were easy, everyone would enter, and the prize would be worthless. Difficulty is the mechanism by which value is protected and distributed to the worthy. The barrier exists not to keep you out, but to determine whether you deserve to be in. Consider the harbor at Dover during a storm. Dozens of vessels wait at anchor, their captain citing the sensible position that the weather is too foul for crossing. The channel churns with gray fury, and every reasonable assessment confirms that the prudent course is to remain in port. One captain weighs anchor and sets forth.
Is he reckless, perhaps?
But observe what follows. He arrives in Calais with empty wharves awaiting him. There is no competition for berths. There is no delay. There is no jostling with other vessels. Meanwhile, those who waited must compete for position when the weather clears and every ship that remained in harbor arrives together, fighting for limited space. The storm that appeared to bar passage was selecting who would have the channel to himself. The wall was a gate, and it opened to the man who pushed. This principle operates with mechanical reliability across all domains of human endeavor. In commerce, when conditions deteriorate and competitors retreat, the field clears for those who advance. In professional pursuits, when colleagues avoid the difficult project that others call impossible, whoever steps forward inherits an empty landscape. In creative work, when criticism silences the faint-hearted, whoever continues to produce finds an audience hungry for what others have ceased providing. The application is universal. Difficulty creates vacancy, and vacancy creates opportunity for those present to fill it. When facing an obstacle, therefore, the question to ask is not, should I continue, but rather, what are others doing right now? If the difficulty is severe, you can be certain that many are abandoning the same path at this very moment. Their departure is your signal. The wall is opening. The gate awaits. I must, however, offer a word of caution, for this teaching can be misapplied by the foolish. Do not confuse what I am saying with foolhardy persistence in genuinely futile endeavors. The gate opens when you push correctly, not when you push stupidly against truly locked doors. The distinction is this: a gate resists but eventually yields to sustained pressure applied intelligently. You push, and though progress is slow, progress exists. There is movement, however slight. A true wall, by contrast, gives no indication of yielding regardless of effort. You push, and nothing whatsoever changes. Observe carefully the results of your pushing. Gradual progress, however small, indicates a gate. Complete absence of any progress whatsoever may indicate a wall. But here is the crucial point. Most men abandon gates whilst mistaking them for walls. They push briefly, encounter resistance, and conclude that passage is impossible. They never push long enough to discover that the wall was yielding all along. The persistence formula is simply this: the wall becomes a gate precisely when you push past the point where others stop. That point is not marked. It carries no sign announcing "continue from here, and you shall succeed." You discover it only by continuing when continuation seems impossible. You discover it by refusing to accept the interpretation that the obstacle exists for your exclusion. There is something almost paradoxical in this truth. The very moment when retreat seems most sensible is often the moment when the gate is about to swing wide. The final resistance is frequently the strongest, and it eliminates the final waverers just before entry is granted. Those who persist through this final resistance inherit what the departing crowd has surrendered. I witnessed this principle operating throughout my own career. Moments that appeared to be walls were, upon continued pressure, revealed as gates. Political setbacks that seemed to mark the end of influence were, in fact, selections that eliminated less persistent men and cleared the field for those who remained. The obstacles that others saw as rejections were, in truth, examinations. And I remained long enough to pass them. You must now understand what resistance truly means. Where others see barriers, you must learn to see examinations. Where others see rejection, you must recognize selection in progress. This transformation of interpretation is permanent once achieved. Every future difficulty will present itself to you not as a message to stop, but as a question. Are you among those who will remain when the others depart? The minority who understand this truth enjoy an advantage that the majority can never match. For whilst the majority retreat at the first sign of resistance, accepting the wall's surface appearance, the minority press forward into the opening that resistance creates. You have now joined that minority, but a sobering question remains. What of the retreats you have already made? What of the gates you abandoned, mistaking them for walls? The next matter we must address is the compound devastation of withdrawal, both practical and spiritual, that such retreats have wrought upon your position and your character. We have seen how retreat disguises itself as wisdom, and we have learned that walls are truly gates to those who push long enough. Now we must confront a harder truth, one that concerns not the future, but the past. We must examine what retreat has already cost you. Each retreat reinforces the habit of retreating. This is the first principle you must understand. Withdrawal is not a single decision with a single consequence. It is the establishment of a pattern, the strengthening of a reflex, the training of the mind in the direction of surrender. Every time you retreat, you make the next retreat easier. Every time you step back, the step back becomes more natural, more automatic, more reflexive. What begins as occasional caution becomes, by degrees, permanent paralysis. A man's life becomes a long succession of abandoned positions and surrendered ground, and he calls himself unlucky. I knew such a man once. He possessed enormous natural gifts, intelligence, education, connection, opportunity. Everything required for distinction was present in abundance, yet he was reduced to bitter obscurity by a single flaw. His first retreat came at 23. He abandoned a promising venture at the first serious obstacle. He justified it thoroughly, with reasonable words and careful explanations. By 30, he had retreated from 4 enterprises, each abandonment accompanied by its own elaborate justification. By 40, he could not begin anything without the voice of retreat already whispering in his ear. "I have been unlucky," he would say, but luck had nothing to do with it. He had practiced surrender until surrender was all he knew. He had trained himself in the art of withdrawal until withdrawal was automatic. He possessed everything required for greatness, except the understanding that greatness is taken at difficult moments. Retreat operates precisely like compound interest, but working against you rather than for you. Each withdrawal makes the next withdrawal easier. The habit strengthens with each exercise. And just as compound interest builds wealth over time through small accumulated gains, compound retreat builds weakness through small accumulated surrenders. The mathematics are unforgiving. 1 retreat is recoverable. 2 retreats establish a pattern. 3 retreats create a reflex. Beyond that, the habit has become character, and character is not easily altered. But the consequences extend beyond the practical into the spiritual. Here is what few understand. The man who retreats loses not only his objective, but a portion of his belief in himself. Self-trust erodes with each surrender. The internal voice that once said, "You can do this," gradually becomes the voice that says, "You never finish anything." This spiritual impoverishment is retreat's most devastating consequence. A man becomes, by degrees, a person who does not complete things, who cannot be relied upon, least of all by himself. When the path grows steep, He knows his own pattern. He knows that when difficulty arrives, he will find a reasonable explanation for stepping back, and this knowledge poisons every undertaking from its inception. There is another cost that must be calculated. Ground you abandon is not preserved for your return. Others occupy it. They fortify it. They build upon it and strengthen their hold. When conditions improve, and you seek to reclaim the position you surrendered, you find it held against you by those who advanced whilst you retreated. The world does not pause whilst you wait for better conditions. Others create those conditions for themselves. Others occupy the ground you imagined you were merely leaving temporarily. The position you hope to reclaim no longer exists. In its place stands a fortress built by those who understood what you did not. Examine your own history with unflinching honesty. If you find multiple retreats justified by multiple reasonable explanations, you are looking not at circumstances but at character. Different situations, same response. That is not bad luck, but established habit. And habits, once recognized, can be broken. What then is the remedy? How does one reverse years of compound retreat? The reversal begins with one completion. Find the smallest commitment you have abandoned and complete it this week. It matters not whether the original reasons for retreat still apply. The objective is not the completion itself, but the breaking of the pattern. Complete something small, and you begin to rebuild the internal voice that says, "I finish what I begin." Then find something larger. The compound effect works in both directions. Each completion makes the next completion easier, just as each retreat made the next retreat easier. You are reversing years of accumulated habit, but the reversal follows the same mathematical laws that created the problem. Small accumulated completions build strength, just as small accumulated retreats built weakness. Let me be clear on one point. Do not use this understanding to torment yourself over past retreats. Self-flagellation serves no purpose. What is done is done. The cost has been paid. The only question now is whether you shall pay more of the same cost or begin accumulating the opposite compound. Another warning deserves mention. Do not attempt to reverse every abandoned commitment simultaneously. This leads to overwhelm and, ironically, another retreat. Choose one, complete it, then choose another. The reversal is gradual but certain. Trust the mathematics. I challenge you now to identify one abandoned project, relationship, or commitment from your past. This week, take one concrete action to complete it or definitively close it with honor rather than abandonment. Write down what you shall do and when. Then do it. This single act begins the reversal of the retreat compound. Report honestly to yourself what you discover about your resistance to completion. Note the voice that counsels delay, that offers reasonable explanations, that suggests waiting for better conditions. You know that voice now. You recognize it for what it is. You understand now what retreat truly costs. Not merely the immediate objective, but the progressive erosion of your capacity to persist in anything. This knowledge is sobering. It is also liberating. It is sobering because you see the full price. It is liberating because you can now choose differently. Every future moment of difficulty becomes a choice not merely about that situation, but about who you are becoming. You see the stakes clearly for the first time. Having seen the deception of retreat, the true function of resistance, and the compound cost of surrender, you are prepared for a deeper question. What is the actual mechanism by which difficulty creates opportunity? The answer awaits in what follows. We come now to the mechanism itself. Having understood the deception, the selection, and the compound cost, you are prepared to see how the entire system operates. This is not philosophy. This is physics. Here is the mechanism. When conditions are favorable, every man advances. The capable and incapable, the resolute and irresolute, the visionary and the short-sighted, all move forward together because forward motion costs them nothing. There is no sorting, no separation, no distinction between those who deserve progress and those who merely accompany it. In fine weather, every ship makes progress. This is not advancement. This is merely drift. But when the storm rises, the great sorting of mankind begins. The mass of men retreat. They retreat for what seem compelling reasons. They retreat, citing prudence, caution, the need to preserve resources, the wisdom of waiting. And in that retreat, they create a vacuum. They vacate positions. They abandon relationships. They surrender opportunities. They withdraw from markets, from ventures, from commitments, from competitions. And all of this, every position, every relationship, every opportunity they abandon, becomes available to the man who advances into the space they have fled. During the financial panic of 1907, I observed this mechanism operating with perfect clarity. Men sold assets at devastating losses, convinced that ruin was imminent. Fear had overcome reason, and the rush for the exits was universal. Those who held their nerve and purchased what the frightened sold emerged, when confidence returned, with positions that would have required decades to build under normal conditions. They possessed no superior intelligence. They commanded no greater resources. They held only the understanding that panic creates vacancy, and vacancy creates opportunity. The man who bought in the storm bought at prices the sun would never see again. You must understand the distinction between drift and advancement. Movement in favorable conditions is not advancement. Everyone moves in favorable conditions. True advancement occurs when you move whilst others stop. True advancement occurs when you expand whilst others contract. True advancement occurs when you occupy the ground that others have fled. This is why easy times produce mediocre people. No sorting occurs. No separation takes place between the worthy and the unworthy. Everyone advances together, and no one learns his true capacity because no one's capacity is tested. But when difficulty arrives, the sorting begins, and the sorting enriches those who remain, whilst impoverishing those who flee. The physics is simple enough for anyone to understand. When mass exits a space, that space becomes available to whoever remains. Apply this principle across all domains: commerce, politics, professional life, creative endeavor, personal relationships. The application is universal. In commerce, when competitors reduce their establishments, dismiss their workers, suspend their advertising, and cease their expansion, they create a vacuum that the advancing merchant fills. He expands whilst they contract. He buys property at reduced prices. He secures loyal workers, grateful for employment. When confidence returns, the retreating merchant must rebuild from diminished position, whilst the advancing merchant dominates from expanded position. In professional life, when colleagues avoid the difficult project, decline the challenging assignment, and wait for easier opportunities, they create a vacuum that whoever steps forward fills. The difficult project, once completed, becomes the foundation of a reputation that would have required years to build under normal conditions. In creative work, when rejection silences the faint-hearted and criticism drives away the uncertain, whoever continues to produce finds an audience with no competition for its attention. The creator who produces whilst others stop inherits the abandoned field. There is a finite amount of success available at any given moment. That amount distributes among those who contend for it. When contenders withdraw, they do not eliminate the prize. They reduce the competition for it. This is not cynicism. This is mechanics. Champions welcome storms. Consider why. The storm is doing their work for them. The storm is eliminating competition, clearing the field, creating the vacuum that they shall fill. Whilst others see danger, the champion sees the sorting that will enrich him. Whilst others feel fear, The champion feels anticipation. How then should you proceed? When crisis arrives in any domain of your life, conduct this assessment immediately. What positions are others abandoning? What relationships are they neglecting? What opportunities are they declining? Make a list. Be specific. Write down the positions that difficulty is causing others to vacate. Then systematically move into the vacuum. I must offer a word of discernment. The error is to move into every vacuum indiscriminately. Not all abandoned positions deserve occupation. Some are abandoned for good reason, because they were worthless to begin with, not because difficulty made them appear so. The distinction required is this: is this position valuable and abandoned only because of difficulty? Or is this position genuinely worthless regardless of conditions? Move into vacuums created by others' fear, not vacuums created by actual worthlessness. The test: would this position be desirable in good times? If the answer is yes, occupy it now whilst others flee. If the answer is no, the position's abandonment reflects sound judgment rather than fearful retreat. I challenge you now to identify one current difficulty in your field or circumstances. On paper, list 3 positions, opportunities, or relationships that others are likely abandoning because of this difficulty. Choose one of these and devise a specific plan to occupy it within 14 days. Execute the plan. Document what unfolds when you move into the vacuum that difficulty has created. You shall discover that the mathematics operate with mechanical reliability. The positions others abandon become yours. The opportunities others decline fall to you. The relationships others neglect transfer their loyalty to whoever remains present. You see now what others cannot see. You see difficulty as a mechanism that creates opportunity by clearing the field. Where others see crisis, you see vacancy. Where others see danger, you see the sorting that enriches those who remain. Your emotional response to hardship transforms from fear to anticipation. What positions are being abandoned becomes your instinctive question when storms arrive. You have learned to think as the champion thinks, but a question remains. How do you compete when talent and resources seem inadequate to the task? The answer shall change everything you believe about competition. You imagine yourself competing against other men. You measure your talents against their talents, your resources against their resources, your advantages against their advantages. You see men of superior ability, greater connection, deeper pockets, and you conclude that you are overmatched. This is a complete misunderstanding of competition. The champion does not compete primarily against the talented men arrayed against him. The champion competes primarily against the human tendency to retreat. His true competition is not the capable man who persists, but the capable man who retreats. And the capable man who retreats is no competitor at all. You see, at every moment of difficulty, a predictable percentage of your competitors will withdraw. They will cite reasons. They will invoke circumstances. They will explain why this particular moment requires stepping back, waiting, reconsidering. And in withdrawing, they eliminate themselves from the field. Every moment of difficulty is a moment when your competition thins. Every hardship is an examination that others fail by abandoning. The champion advances not through supernatural courage, but through simple recognition that advancing at such moments is the most rational thing a man can do. In the early political contests of my career, I faced opponents of formidable ability, men of superior education, deeper resources, stronger connections. By every reasonable measure, I ought to have been overmatched. Yet I noticed something peculiar. These formidable opponents frequently withdrew at critical moments. They cited practical concerns. They invoked family obligations. They spoke of more opportune timing, of waiting for better conditions, of strategic patience. And in their withdrawal, they ceased to be opponents at all. My advantage was not talent. My advantage was persistence. I remained when they departed. The elections I won were not won by defeating opponents, but by being present when opponents defeated themselves through retreat. Consider the mathematics of this principle. At any given difficulty level, a predictable percentage of competitors will withdraw. If difficulty is mild, some retreat. If difficulty is moderate, many retreat. If difficulty is severe, most retreat. If difficulty is extreme, nearly all retreat. The mathematics favor the persistent with mechanical reliability. You need not be the most talented competitor. You need not possess the greatest resources. You need only remain when others depart, and the field clears before you with mathematical certainty. This understanding liberates you from envy of others' gifts. You need not resent their advantages or lament your limitations. You need not be the most talented, the most resourced, or the most connected. You need only be the most persistent. And this is entirely within your power. Talent is largely given. You are born with capacities you did not choose, but persistence is entirely chosen. You decide, at each moment of difficulty, whether to advance or retreat. And in this decision lies your advantage over men of greater gifts who lack your understanding. Watch carefully during any period of difficulty. Note who disappears. Note who scales back. Note who postpones. Note who redirects. These men are not your competitors. They have eliminated themselves. Your true competitors are only those still standing beside you when the difficulty has done its work. In your current endeavor, identify your perceived competitors. Now track their behavior during difficulty. How many reduce effort when conditions worsen? How many disappear entirely? Keep a simple record. You shall discover that the competitive field thins dramatically during hard times. The men you feared, the men whose talents you envied, the men whose advantages seemed insurmountable, many of them vanish when difficulty arrives. And those who vanish are not competitors. Your strategy should shift accordingly. Instead of trying to outperform in talent, simply outlast in persistence. When competitors retreat, increase your presence. When they reduce, expand. When they postpone, accelerate. The mathematics compound in your favor. I must, however, offer a word of caution. Do not use this principle to justify mediocrity. Persistence without competence is merely stubborn futility. The principle assumes a baseline of capability. Given that baseline, persistence becomes the determining factor. Persistence matters enormously, but it matters among the competent. Develop your abilities whilst out-persisting others. Both are required. Persistence alone, applied to work of insufficient quality, produces nothing but prolonged failure. The man who persists at what he cannot do is not courageous, but foolish. The application is therefore twofold. First, develop genuine capability in your field. Become competent. Become skilled. Become worthy of the positions you seek. Second, out-persist every competitor who possesses equal or greater skill. The most skilled man who retreats loses to the less skilled man who remains. Your anxiety about competitors should transform into strategic observation. Rather than fearing their talents, watch their behavior during difficulty. Rather than envying their resources, note whether they deploy those resources when conditions deteriorate. Rather than lamenting your limitations, recognize that your persistence can overcome those limitations. You feel liberation from the burden of needing to be the best. You accept instead the achievable goal of being the most present. Competition becomes less frightening because you now know it operates on a dimension you control. The talented man who retreats is no competitor. The resourced man who retreats is no competitor. The connected man who retreats is no competitor. Only the man who remains competes, and against remaining men, you have an even chance regardless of their apparent advantages. The field is thin. The field is always thin when difficulty has done its work. And in a thin field, persistence alone determines victory. There is a peculiar comfort in this understanding. You no longer need to measure yourself against giants. You need only outlast them. You no longer need to possess what they possess. You need only remain when they depart. The burden of being superior lifts from your shoulders, replaced by the manageable task of simply being present. I have witnessed this truth operating throughout the affairs of nations and the struggles of individual men. The most talented do not always prevail. The most resourced do not always succeed. But those who remain, those who persist, those who refuse the comfortable invitation to retreat, these men inherit what the departing leave behind. But when is the optimal moment to advance? You understand now that difficulty clears the field, that persistence matters more than talent, that competition operates through elimination rather than combat. Yet one question remains. When is the moment of maximum opportunity? The answer shall seem paradoxical until you have understood it. The worst moments are actually the best moments, and recognizing this transforms everything. We arrive now at the principle that shall seem most paradoxical until you have fully grasped it. The moment of maximum difficulty is the moment of maximum opportunity. This statement violates every instinct, contradicts every conventional wisdom, and yet it follows with logical inevitability from everything we have established. The very worst moments, when everything seems lost, when continuation appears impossible, when every voice counsels surrender, these are not moments of greatest danger. They are moments of greatest promise. Consider why this must be so. At such moments, retreat has reached its maximum extent. Nearly everyone has withdrawn. The field is nearly empty. The man who advances now advances into a landscape cleared of competition, rich with abandoned positions, ripe with undefended opportunity. The storm that drives others into harbor fills his sails alone. I speak from experience that cut to the bone. There came a moment in my own career when what appeared to be catastrophe was, in truth, the opening of a door I could not then perceive. The political wilderness of the 1930s taught me this doctrine. My warnings about the gathering dangers in Germany were dismissed as warmongering. My influence was reduced to nothing. Former allies avoided association with my views. Every reasonable assessment said my career was finished, that I had become a relic of a more belligerent age, unsuited to the new spirit of accommodation. Yet those years of apparent defeat positioned me precisely for the moment when the nation, having ignored my warnings, discovered they were true. The very isolation that seemed to mark my end had preserved my credibility when others' credibility lay in ruins. The darkest hour prepared the brightest noon. What seemed like ending was positioning. You must train yourself to invert your instinctive response to difficulty. When circumstances scream retreat, you must hear instead advance. When everything says stop, you must hear this is when movement matters most. This mental inversion is the champion's discipline, and it must be practiced until it becomes reflex. The ordinary man monitors conditions for signs of improvement. He waits for the weather to clear before setting forth. He seeks confirmation that the worst has passed before committing himself. And in waiting for these signs, he waits until the field is crowded again with all the others who waited alongside him. But the champion monitors for different signs entirely. He watches for indicators of maximum withdrawal, widespread despair, universal pessimism, complete confidence among observers that conditions cannot possibly improve. These signals, which the ordinary man reads as warnings to stay back, the champion reads as announcements that his moment has arrived. When despair is universal, retreat is universal. When retreat is universal, opportunity is maximum. The mathematics admit no exception. There is another dimension to this doctrine that deserves careful attention. The path that is impassable today will be crowded tomorrow. This is inevitable. When conditions improve, everyone returns. The ships that sheltered in harbor all set forth together when the storm passes, and they compete for the same berths, the same winds, the same destinations. The advantage belongs entirely to those who advanced whilst the path was empty, not to those who waited to join the returning crowd. The man who moved in darkness holds position when light returns. The man who waited for light must fight for position against every other man who waited. I witnessed this principle operating during the darkest days of 1940. When invasion seemed imminent and defeat appeared certain, some men of affairs began quietly transferring assets abroad, making arrangements for departure, positioning themselves to survive what they considered inevitable catastrophe. They were prudent by every conventional measure. But those who remained, who invested themselves more deeply in the nation's struggle rather than less, who advanced their commitment when retreat seemed sensible. These men emerged from the crucible with positions of influence and trust that would have required generations to build under normal conditions. Their advancement during darkness paid compound dividends when light returned. How, then, should you apply this doctrine? When you identify that conditions have reached maximum difficulty, take immediate, significant action. Not small action, significant action. This is the moment to make major moves, significant investments when others liquidate, bold proposals when others retreat to safety, decisive commitments when others hedge and qualify. The logic is counterintuitive but sound. Those who wait for improvement must compete with everyone else who waited. Those who move in darkness have the field to themselves. Identify the boldest action appropriate to your circumstances and execute it during the darkest hour, not after. I must offer a word of caution, for this doctrine can be misapplied by the reckless. The darkest hour doctrine is not a license for foolhardiness. It is a framework for recognizing opportunity in apparent disaster, not an invitation to act without resources or capability. Advance during dark hours, certainly. But ensure you can sustain the advance until light returns. Bold action that cannot be maintained is merely dramatic failure. Bold action that can be sustained until conditions improve is how empires are built. The distinction matters enormously. The man who overextends in darkness, who commits resources he cannot sustain, who advances beyond his capacity to hold position, this man does not benefit from the darkest hour. He becomes one of its casualties. Advance boldly, but advance within the limits of what you can maintain through the darkness until dawn. I challenge you to practice what I call the inversion drill. For the next 7 days, each time you feel the impulse to retreat from anything, pause and deliberately consider the opposite action. Do not necessarily take it, but consider it seriously. Ask yourself, if this is when others are retreating, what would advancing look like? Write down both options. Choose consciously rather than reflexively. Document your observations about what this inversion reveals about your habitual responses. You possess now the champion's inverted vision. Where others see the worst moment, you see the best opportunity. Where universal retreat signals danger to the crowd, you recognize the field being cleared for your advancement. This transformation is permanent. You shall never again experience a dark hour without simultaneously recognizing it as the open door that darkness creates. The darkest hour is not your enemy. It is your ally, doing your work of clearing the field, eliminating competition, creating the vacuum into which you advance. The mechanics of opportunity are now clear to you, but a deeper question emerges. How do you transform from one who understands these principles to one who embodies them? Understanding is not enough. The next stage of our journey reveals the realizations that shall rewire your very reflexes. We enter now into deeper waters. Understanding the mechanics of opportunity is necessary, but insufficient. Many men understand and yet fail to act upon their understanding. The gap between knowing and doing yawns wide, and most fall into it. To bridge this gap requires not merely intellectual assent, but genuine realization. Truth that sinks from the mind into the bone, that transforms not what you think, but what you are. There are 4 such realizations, and we begin with the first and most fundamental. Nothing is preserved by retreat. This statement appears simple. You may believe you already accept it, but I tell you that until this truth inhabits your very reflexes, you do not yet possess it. For the comfortable fiction that retreat preserves, position is woven into the fabric of how men think, and it requires sustained effort to tear it out. Consider what actually happens when you retreat. You imagine that you are preserving your position, conserving your resources, protecting what you have whilst you wait for better conditions. This is the story you tell yourself, but what is actually occurring? Whilst you rest, the world moves. Whilst you wait for better conditions, others create those conditions for themselves. Whilst you protect what you have, the value of what you have diminishes relative to what others are building. The man who retreats does not stand still. He falls behind, and the ground he loses can rarely be recovered, for in the time of his retreat others have occupied it and fortified it against his return. I knew a merchant who suspended his advertising during an economic contraction. He called it sensible economy. He preserved his funds. His ledgers showed reduced expenditure, and he congratulated himself on his prudence. But observe what occurred. His competitors, who maintained their presence, captured the reduced market attention. Customers, seeing fewer options, formed new loyalties to whoever remained visible. When conditions improved and our prudent merchant resumed his advertising, he discovered that his position was not preserved, but destroyed. Customers had formed attachments elsewhere. His competitors had fortified their positions with the loyalty he had surrendered. The money he saved was trivial compared to the market position he lost. He had retreated, and the world had not waited. You must understand the moving world principle. The world does not pause whilst you consider, recover, or wait. Every moment you do not advance, others do. Your relative position deteriorates even when your absolute position seems unchanged. Standing still is falling behind. There is no neutral ground. The fortification effect compounds this truth. Ground you abandon is not merely occupied, but fortified. Others build upon it. They strengthen their hold. They develop relationships you neglected. They establish presence where you withdrew. When you return, you face not open ground, but defended territory. Recapture requires far more than initial capture would have required. This is why retreat feels cheaper than it is. In the moment of retreat, you are preserving immediate resources. Your accounts show savings. Your energy is conserved. Your risk is reduced. All of this is true, and all of this is misleading. What your accounts do not show is what you lose by not advancing. What your immediate assessment misses is the fortification occurring in your absence. The calculation that justifies retreat includes only what you save by not spending. It omits what you lose by not advancing. And what you lose by not advancing almost always exceeds what you save by not spending. Before any retreat, therefore, calculate honestly. What will recapturing this position cost if I abandon it now? Include in this calculation the competitor fortification that will occur, the relationships that will cool, the momentum that will dissipate, the ground that will need to be retaken. The answer is almost always this: recapture will cost more than holding position would cost now. This calculation should govern your decisions. When considering any withdrawal, perform this assessment. What is the cost of maintaining my current position? What will be the cost of recapturing this position after I abandon it? If the cost of recapture exceeds the cost of maintenance, and it almost always does, the answer is clear. Do not retreat. Find another way to manage present difficulties whilst holding your position. I challenge you now to conduct what I call the recapture calculation. Identify one position you are currently considering abandoning or reducing commitment to. On paper, estimate the true cost of recapture. How long to rebuild? What competitors will have fortified? What relationships will have cooled? What momentum will have dissipated? Now compare this honestly to the cost of maintaining your current commitment. Make your decision based on this complete calculation, not the incomplete calculation of immediate savings alone. The greatest mistake men make is overestimating their ability to return. They believe they can step back temporarily and step forward later whenever they choose. They rarely can. The world changes during their absence. Positions fill. Relationships cool. Momentum dissipates. Another error deserves mention, believing that waiting reduces risk. This is often backwards. Waiting frequently increases risk by allowing competitors to strengthen and opportunities to pass. Inaction has costs as surely as action does, though the costs of inaction are less visible and therefore more easily ignored. You must now calculate correctly. Retreat is no longer an option that preserves anything in your mind. It is an option that costs everything. Your decision framework has changed. The question, should I retreat, transforms into a different question entirely. Can I afford the cost of retreat? And the honest answer, now that you calculate fully, is almost always no. This first realization must sink from understanding into conviction, from conviction into reflex. When the impulse to retreat arises, the calculation must arise with it automatically. What will recapture cost? The answer will keep you in position when every comfortable instinct counsels withdrawal. But knowing that retreat preserves nothing leaves a question unanswered. When difficulty arrives, what question should you ask? The second realization provides the answer, and it shall transform difficulty from threat to advantage. The first realization taught you that nothing is preserved by retreat. The second realization transforms how you interpret difficulty itself. This transformation is so complete that you shall never again experience hardship in the same way. When difficulty arrives, the ordinary man asks a natural question. What does this say about my chances? He assesses his own position, his own resources, his own capacity to endure. He looks inward, measuring himself against the challenge before him. This is the wrong question. It leads to paralysis, to doubt, to the very retreat we have learned to recognize as destructive. The champion asks a different question entirely. When difficulty arrives, he asks, what are others doing right now? You see, difficulty is information, but it is information about others, not about you. If difficulty is severe, many are retreating at this very moment. If difficulty is very severe, almost everyone is retreating. This knowledge of others' behavior is worth more than any assessment of your own resources. I witnessed this principle operating during a military engagement in my youth. A commander facing grave circumstances gathered his staff, but he did not ask, "Can we prevail?" He asked instead, "What are the enemy's commanders thinking right now?" The answer, upon analysis, was revealing. They believed the situation hopeless for our forces and were preparing for easy victory. They expected retreat and had positioned themselves to exploit it. This knowledge transformed our commander's assessment entirely. If they expected retreat, advance would catch them unprepared. If they anticipated our withdrawal, our attack would find them positioned for pursuit rather than defense. He attacked at dawn and routed forces that outnumbered his own. He succeeded not because his assessment of his own resources was favorable, it was not, but because his assessment of his opponent's expectations was accurate. Difficulty told him about others, and he used that information whilst others used difficulty only to assess themselves. Once you learn to think this way, your emotional response to hardship inverts completely. Where once you felt fear, now you feel anticipation. The conversion follows a simple formula. Difficulty is here becomes others are retreating, becomes opportunity is opening, becomes anticipation rather than fear. Train this conversion until it is automatic. When difficulty arrives and your instinct is fear, consciously convert to anticipation using this chain of recognition. Others are retreating. The field is clearing. Opportunity is emerging. Let me be specific about application. The next time difficulty arrives in any form, immediately ask, what percentage of my competitors are likely retreating right now? Estimate honestly based on the severity of the difficulty. If the difficulty is severe, assume high percentages of withdrawal are occurring. Then ask, what positions are they vacating? Make a list. Then ask, which of these positions do I want? Move toward those positions immediately. You are using difficulty as intelligence about the competitive landscape. You are acting on that intelligence whilst others are still deciding whether to flee. This is the advantage that the second realization provides. Difficulty creates predictable behavior patterns, and you can rely upon this predictability. Mild difficulty, some retreat. Moderate difficulty, many retreat. Severe difficulty, most retreat. Extreme difficulty, nearly all retreat. Use this prediction to calculate your competitive advantage at any given moment. Every difficulty contains information about what is happening elsewhere in the field. Extract that information. Ask specifically what positions are being abandoned, what opportunities are being declined, what relationships are being neglected. This information is more valuable than any assessment of your own situation. Your own situation you know. What others are doing you must deduce, and difficulty provides the key to that deduction. A common error must be addressed. Do not assume that difficulty affecting you does not also affect your competitors. It almost certainly does, and it probably affects them more since they lack your understanding. The mistake is assuming that your competitors are immune to the same pressures driving your impulse to retreat. They are not immune. They face the same pressures. But they face them with less understanding, which means they will retreat faster and further than you will. Trust the mathematics. If difficulty makes you want to retreat, it makes others want to retreat. If it makes you consider withdrawal, it makes others withdraw. The pressure you feel is a measure of the pressure they feel, and most of them will yield to that pressure, whilst you, understanding what it signifies, will not. Your relationship with difficulty has now fundamentally changed. Where you once received difficulty as a message about your situation, you now receive it as information about others. Your first question when hardship arrives is no longer, "What does this mean for me?" but rather, "What are my competitors doing?" This question leads inevitably to action rather than paralysis. You have converted difficulty from enemy to intelligence source. The very force that once triggered your retreat now triggers your reconnaissance. What positions are being abandoned? What opportunities are opening? Where is the vacuum forming? The transformation is complete when this question arises automatically, without conscious effort. When difficulty arrives and your immediate reflexive response is curiosity about others' behavior rather than fear about your own situation, you have achieved the second realization. I have found this principle operating in every significant endeavor of my life. During the darkest passages of the war, when reports arrived of setbacks and losses, I trained myself to ask immediately, what are our adversaries concluding from this? What do they expect us to do? And if they expect retreat, what advantage lies in advance? This habit of thought transformed how I experienced crisis. Difficulty ceased to be merely burden and became simultaneously intelligence. Every setback contained information about others' expectations, and expectations, once known, can be confounded. You must practice this mental conversion until it becomes your natural response. When difficulty arrives, Do not permit yourself to dwell on assessment of your own position until you have first assessed what others are likely doing. The question about others must precede the question about yourself. Train this sequence until it is automatic. But realization must become action, and action must become habit. Understanding alone does not suffice. A man may comprehend everything written here and still retreat when crisis comes, because retreat has become his reflex. The next stage addresses this gap between understanding and embodiment. Knowing must become doing, and doing must become being. The third and fourth realizations complete this transformation. Understanding alone does not suffice. This truth must be faced directly, for it explains why so many who comprehend wisdom fail to benefit from it. A man may accept everything written in these pages. He may nod at every principle, agree with every argument, recognize himself in every example, and yet, when crisis comes, he may retreat anyway. Why? Because retreat has become his reflex, and reflexes are not changed by understanding. They are changed only by practice. The third realization addresses this gap. Maximum difficulty is maximum opportunity. This principle you have encountered before, but now it must move from concept to conviction, from something you remember to something you feel. When things are at their worst, when continuation seems impossible, when every voice counsels surrender, you must feel excitement, not fear. The very worst moment is the very best opportunity, because at that moment retreat has reached maximum extent, the field is maximally cleared, and the vacuum is greatest. This feeling cannot be decided. It must be trained. Athletes do not decide in the heat of competition what their muscles will do. They have trained their bodies until the correct response is automatic. They have practiced thousands of times, so that when the moment arrives, they do not think, they act. The response has been built into their very nervous system. So must you train your responses to difficulty. Understanding that maximum difficulty is maximum opportunity is merely the beginning. You must practice responding to difficulty with advance so many times that advance becomes your reflex, just as retreat was once your reflex. I knew a man who understood these principles intellectually, yet retreated at every serious test. His mind knew the truth, but his reflexes had been formed by years of withdrawal. When pressure arrived, his body remembered decades of retreat, and it retreated again regardless of what his mind knew. He began deliberately seeking small difficulties and consciously advancing through them. He did not wait for major crises, he created minor ones. A conversation he had been avoiding, he initiated it. A task he had been postponing, he completed it. A small decision he had been deferring, he made it. Each time, he noted his instinct to retreat and consciously overrode it. Each time, he acknowledged to himself, I advanced when my instinct was to retreat. After 18 months of this deliberate practice, his reflex had transformed. When larger crises arrived, advancement was no longer a decision requiring effort. It had become instinct, as automatic as retreat had once been. This leads us to the fourth realization. The habit of advancement must replace the habit of retreat. This is accomplished through practice, through conscious decision, through the repeated experience of advancing when every instinct screams for retreat. Begin with small matters. You need not seek dramatic confrontations. The process of reflex transformation requires quantity, not intensity. 3 small advances per day are worth more than 1 large advance per month. You are building a neural pathway, and neural pathways are built through repetition. Identify difficulties you would normally avoid or postpone. They need not be significant, a conversation you have been delaying, a task you have been avoiding, a minor decision you have been deferring. Advance through each one deliberately and consciously. Note your instinct to retreat. Do not suppress it. Observe it. Then, consciously override it. After completing each advance, acknowledge to yourself what you have done. I advanced when my instinct was to retreat. This acknowledgement matters. You are reprogramming how you think about yourself. The internal voice that once said, "You always back down," gradually becomes, "You advance through difficulty." Identity follows behavior, and behavior is what you are training. The progression from small to large is not optional. Men who attempt to transform their reflexes by immediately seeking extreme challenges typically fail dramatically. That failure reinforces their retreat reflexes rather than replacing them. Build the pathway with small advances. Strengthen it through repetition. Only then test it against larger challenges. The reversal is gradual but certain. Trust the process. I challenge you to undertake what I call the Reflex Training Program. For the next 30 days, maintain a daily discipline. Each morning, identify one difficulty you will advance through before day's end. It need not be significant. Small difficulties serve as well as large ones for building reflexes. Each evening, record whether you advanced and what you felt. Note particularly the moment when your instinct counseled retreat and you advanced anyway. Track the pattern over 30 days. You are not merely reading about advancement. You are training your nervous system to advance automatically when difficulty appears. The reading creates understanding. Only the practice creates transformation. Do not expect to feel different immediately. Reflex transformation is gradual. The first week, you will feel resistance at every advance. The second week, resistance will seem familiar. The third week, you may notice advance becoming slightly easier. By the fourth week, you may catch yourself advancing before you consciously decide to. This is the transformation taking hold. Continue beyond 30 days if necessary. The reflex must be thoroughly established before you can rely upon it in genuine crisis. Another error must be addressed. Do not believe that understanding equals capability. Understanding is the beginning, not the end. The work of reflex transformation takes months, not moments. Commit to the process. There are no shortcuts. You possess now not merely concepts, but a training program. You understand that knowing must become doing, and doing must become being. You have a method for transforming retreat reflexes into advancement reflexes. The path is clear, though demanding. The destination is achievable, though distant. You are no longer merely a student of these principles. You are a practitioner in active training. The 4 realizations are now yours. Nothing is preserved by retreat. Difficulty tells you about others. Maximum difficulty is maximum opportunity. The habit of advancement must replace the habit of retreat through practice. But principles require application. How do these truths operate in the specific domains of life? The champion's conduct in commerce, in reputation, in creative endeavor. These await examination. We turn now to see how these principles manifest in the practical affairs of men. We turn now from principle to practice, from understanding to application. The truths we have established operate with mechanical reliability across all domains of human endeavor, but seeing them operate in specific circumstances makes them concrete, actionable, impossible to forget. Consider first the domain of commerce, for here the principles manifest with particular clarity. In times of commercial depression, the mass of merchants follow a predictable pattern. They reduce establishments. They dismiss workers. They cut inventories. They suspend advertising. They cease expansion. They retreat because custom has declined, credit has tightened, and the future appears uncertain. Their retreat seems prudent. Every conventional measure confirms its wisdom. Cash is preserved. Risk is reduced. The enterprise survives to fight another day when conditions improve. But observe what follows. When confidence returns, and confidence always returns, the retreated merchant must rebuild from diminished position. He has lost workers who found employment elsewhere and formed new loyalties. He has lost customers who found other suppliers during his absence. He has lost the momentum that years of effort had built. He must reconstruct from foundations that have eroded during his withdrawal. Meanwhile, the merchant who advanced during the Depression emerges with a dominant position that would have required decades to build under normal conditions. I observed this principle operating during the slump following the Great War. A manufacturer of machine tools faced the same crisis as his competitors. Orders had collapsed. Credit was scarce. The future appeared bleak by every reasonable assessment. His competitors reduced operations. They dismissed skilled men. They canceled orders for new equipment. They suspended development of new products. They retreated into the smallest possible configuration, waiting for better times. This manufacturer did the opposite. He expanded his plant, purchasing additional facilities at distressed prices from those who were liquidating. He acquired modern equipment at fractions of normal cost from desperate sellers. He secured the services of skilled engineers who were grateful for employment and would remember who had stood by them. When industry recovered, and it did recover, he controlled the market. His competitors, rebuilding from diminished positions, struggled to recapture what they had surrendered. They called him lucky. He called it arithmetic. The countercyclical principle operates with mathematical certainty. Move against the prevailing direction. When others contract, expand. When others sell, buy. When others dismiss, hire. The mathematics favor those who act opposite to the crowd during extremes. Consider why this must be so. During depression, assets can be acquired at fractions of normal cost. Property, equipment, inventory, all become available at prices that prosperity would never permit. The man who buys during depression buys at prices the sun will never see again. During depression, talent becomes available that prosperity keeps fully employed. Skilled workers, loyal managers, creative minds, all become accessible to whoever offers employment when employment is scarce, and their gratitude, their loyalty, their commitment is purchased along with their services. During depression, customers whose regular suppliers have retreated are seeking new relationships. They discover whoever remains present, and they form loyalties that persist when conditions improve. The merchant present during hard times earns loyalty the returning merchant cannot match. All of this accumulates whilst the retreating merchant preserves his cash, and when conditions improve, all of this pays compound dividends. The practical application is straightforward. If you operate any commercial enterprise, audit your response to economic difficulty. Are you contracting whilst competitors contract? This is precisely the opposite of correct strategy. Identify one area where you can expand countercyclically. Increase marketing when others reduce theirs. Acquire talent others are releasing. Invest in capabilities whilst prices are depressed. Execute this expansion immediately. You are not taking risk. You are reducing risk by positioning for the recovery that economic difficulty always precedes. I challenge you to conduct what I call the counter-cyclical audit. Review your business or professional decisions during the last period of difficulty. For each decision, mark whether you contracted or expanded. Count the results. If contractions outnumber expansions, you have been following the crowd into weakness. Now identify one action you can take in the next 30 days that moves counter to the prevailing retreat around you. Commit to it in writing. Execute it. Document the results. A word of caution must be offered. The error is expanding without adequate reserves to sustain the expansion until conditions improve. Counter-cyclical strategy requires the capacity to maintain expanded position through the difficult period. Expansion that must be reversed is worse than no expansion at all. It consumes resources and then surrenders what those resources purchased. Ensure your advance can be sustained. Calculate honestly how long conditions might remain difficult, and ensure your resources can maintain your expanded position for that duration. Another error deserves mention: waiting until certainty returns before acting. If you wait for certainty, you wait until opportunity has passed. By the time conditions have clearly improved, prices have risen, talent has been absorbed, customers have formed new loyalties. Act on probability, sustained by adequate reserves. You see now the champion's conduct in commerce. It is not reckless. It is not gambling. It is the disciplined application of principles that operate with mathematical reliability. When others retreat, you advance. When others sell, you buy. When others dismiss, you hire. This conduct feels counterintuitive because it contradicts what the majority are doing. But the majority are destroying their positions through retreat whilst you are building yours through advance. The discomfort of acting against the crowd is the price of emerging from difficulty in dominant position. Your instinct when business conditions worsen now shifts from contraction to assessment. What can I acquire? What positions can I occupy? What talent is available? These questions replace the questions that once governed your response to difficulty. The transformation in commercial thinking is complete when you welcome economic difficulty rather than fear it. When you hear reports of declining conditions, of tightening credit, of retreating competitors, you must feel not anxiety, but anticipation. The sorting has begun. The field is clearing. The opportunities are multiplying. This does not mean you are indifferent to difficulties, hardships. The suffering that economic contraction creates is real and deserving of compassion. But your response to that difficulty, your conduct within it, determines whether you emerge strengthened or diminished. Compassion for others' suffering does not require you to join them in retreat. The merchant's advance is now clear, but the same principles apply beyond commerce. The champion's conduct in defending reputation, in creative endeavor, in every domain where difficulty tests resolve, these await examination. We shall consider them in due course. The principles we have established operate beyond commerce. They govern with equal reliability the domain of reputation, where the stakes are often higher and the costs of retreat more devastating. When facing scandal, defeat, or attack upon reputation, the instinct of most men is to apologize, retreat, and wait for the storm to pass. They lower their heads. They reduce their visibility. They offer concessions to their accusers in hope of mercy. They retreat into silence, trusting that time will heal what their withdrawal cannot. In doing so, they confirm their critics' accusations and embolden their opponents. Retreat in response to accusation is read as admission. Silence is interpreted as guilt. Withdrawal is taken as confession. The very act meant to preserve reputation destroys it. But the man who advances, who defends himself vigorously, who counterattacks, who refuses to accept the narrative of his enemies, finds that boldness changes the character of battle entirely. Accusers expect retreat. They are unprepared for advance. Their strategy assumes your withdrawal, and when you attack instead, their strategy collapses. I have faced attacks upon my reputation that would have destroyed lesser men who chose retreat. When accused of responsibility for military disaster at the Dardanelles, many counseled withdrawal from public life until the controversy passed. Friends suggested that silence was golden, that dignified retreat would preserve what remained of my standing. I chose instead to make my case vigorously. I defended my decisions publicly, in Parliament, in print, before any audience that would hear me. I did not merely defend, I attacked the inadequacy of those who attacked me. I examined their motives, questioned their judgment, challenged their competence to criticize. The controversy did not destroy me. It defined me. Those who expected retreat were caught unprepared by advance. My defense became offense, and I emerged from the fire tempered rather than consumed. The very crisis that should have ended my career became instead a demonstration of resilience that enhanced my reputation for future struggles. The confirmation trap explains why retreat fails. When you retreat in response to accusation, you confirm the accusation. Your accusers point to your withdrawal as evidence that their charges were just. See how he hides, they say. See how he cannot face us. Your retreat becomes their proof. But when you defend vigorously, you change the narrative. Instead of accuser and admitted wrongdoer, the battle becomes a contest between equals. This shift is profoundly disorienting to those who expected submission. They prepared to accept your surrender. They find themselves in combat. Vigorous defense conducted with energy and conviction shifts the narrative entirely. You are no longer defending yourself against accusation. You are contesting for truth against opponents whose motives and judgment are as questionable as yours. The spotlight that was trained upon your alleged failures now illuminates their inadequacies as well. Consider also the counterattack opportunity. Attack upon you opens examination of your attackers. Their motives become legitimate topics for inquiry. Their records become fair game for scrutiny. Their own failures and contradictions, which they hoped to obscure behind their assault upon you, suddenly face exposure. The counterattack often reveals that the accusers are more vulnerable than the accused. Men who attack others typically have vulnerabilities of their own. In the fury of their assault, they forget that vigorous defense will expose them to the same examination they sought to impose. The counterattack reminds them, I do not counsel dishonesty or denial of genuine error. When you have erred, acknowledge it, but do not permit that acknowledgement to become surrender. Accept responsibility for what deserves responsibility, whilst vigorously defending what deserves defense. The distinction matters. Honest acknowledgement of limited error, combined with vigorous defense of what remains defensible, is strength. Wholesale collapse before accusation is weakness. The practical application is direct. When facing criticism, attack upon your work or reputation, or professional setback, do not retreat. Do not apologize reflexively. Do not wait for the controversy to pass in hopeful silence. Instead, defend your position vigorously. Make your case publicly and completely. Examine the motives and records of your critics. Refuse to accept their narrative as the only possible interpretation of events. This does not mean dishonesty or denial of genuine faults. It means defending what deserves defense and refusing to be destroyed by opponents who expect your surrender. I challenge you to conduct what I call the vigorous response exercise. Identify one criticism, attack, or setback you are currently facing or have recently faced. Write the defense you would make if retreat were not an option. What would you say if you were compelled to advance rather than withdraw? What weaknesses exist in your critics' positions? What aspects of their motives, their records, their judgment deserve examination? Now consider, what would happen if you actually delivered this defense? Often the only thing preventing vigorous response is the assumption that retreat is safer. That assumption is usually wrong. A word of caution must be offered. Vigorous defense of the indefensible produces worse results than retreat. This principle applies to positions and actions that deserve defense. The error is not defending the indefensible, the error is retreating from the defensible because retreat seems easier. Another mistake deserves mention: confusing vigor with abuse. Defend forcefully, but with facts and logic. Personal attack without substance weakens rather than strengthens your position. The strength of your defense lies in its accuracy and its evidence, not in its volume or its venom. You no longer instinctively retreat when attacked. Your first response to criticism is now assessment. Is this defensible? If yes, you advance. The fear of confrontation is replaced by understanding that confrontation properly managed strengthens rather than weakens. You become someone who cannot be easily intimidated, and this reputation itself provides protection. Those who might attack a man known for retreat hesitate to attack a man known for vigorous response. Your reputation for defense deters the attacks that would require defense. Crisis, properly managed, becomes defining moment rather than destruction. The attack you survive and answer becomes proof of your strength. Your response to crisis enters your permanent record and reputation. Men remember not that you were attacked, but how you responded to attack. The statesman's stand is clear. Do not retreat. Do not apologize reflexively. Do not wait in silence. Defend what deserves defense, vigorously and publicly, and let your defense become offense against those who expected your surrender. But there is another domain where these principles operate with particular power: creative endeavor. The Creator's path through rejection awaits examination. The principles we have established find perhaps their most powerful application in the domain of creative endeavor. Here, where rejection is constant and criticism relentless, the champion's conduct determines who produces lasting work and who vanishes into silence. Each rejection the Creator faces is interpreted by most as a message to stop. The manuscript returned, the proposal declined, the work criticized. These experiences seem to say, abandon this path, try something safer. Your efforts are unwanted. The mass of would-be creators accept this interpretation. They retreat into silence, producing nothing, sharing nothing, becoming nothing. They possessed talent, perhaps even genius, but they lacked the understanding that rejection is selection, not exclusion. The one who advances, who produces more in response to rejection, who refuses to accept others' assessment of his worth, eventually breaks through. He breaks through not because his talent was greater than those who retreated, but because he was still present when they had surrendered the field. I know well the sting of rejection. My early writings were refused by publishers who saw no merit in them. My political speeches were dismissed as bombast by critics who preferred more measured tones. My warnings about gathering dangers were rejected by those who considered themselves wiser. Many counseled me to seek more practical employment, to abandon literary ambition, to moderate my public voice. I produced more. Each rejection fueled not retreat, but increased output. Eventually, the publishers who rejected early work competed for later work. The critics who dismissed my speeches quoted them as examples of the form. The warnings they rejected became the foundation of my authority when events proved them true. I became an author, an orator, a leader, not because I was the most talented, but because I refused to stop producing whilst others stopped. Persistence is not everything, but without persistence, everything else is nothing. The volume principle explains why persistence succeeds. Rejection is overcome by volume. If you produce one work and it is rejected, you have failed. The rejection defines your effort, but if you produce 100 works and 50 are rejected, you have succeeded 50 times. The rejections become statistically insignificant against the weight of acceptance. Increase output rather than retreating from rejection. The mathematics are simple. If your acceptance rate is 10%, then producing 10 works yields 1 acceptance. Producing 100 works yields 10 acceptances. The acceptance rate remains constant, only the output changes, and output is entirely within your control. You must learn to treat others' assessment of your worth as opinion rather than verdict. This mental shift transforms rejection from devastating blow to useful information. The editor who declines your manuscript has expressed a preference, not pronounced a sentence. His judgment reflects his tastes, his circumstances, his needs at this moment. It does not reflect your value. Treat rejection as data about the rejector's preferences, not as verdict upon your worth. This is not delusion or denial. It is accurate interpretation. The same work rejected by one publisher is accepted by another. The same proposal declined by one patron is embraced by another. Rejection tells you about this particular assessor at this particular moment. It tells you nothing about your ultimate worth. Creative fields select for persistence as much as talent. Many talented creators abandon the field after rejection. Their talent avails them nothing because they are not present to employ it. Those who remain are not necessarily more talented, they are more persistent. And this persistence is within your control, whilst talent is largely given. The presence victory is simply this. The ultimate victory in creative work is to be present when others have departed. If you are still creating when your cohort has surrendered, you inherit their abandoned opportunities. Victory comes to those who remain. The audience that would have attended to your departed competitors now attends to you. The practical application is the establishment of volume targets that make individual rejection irrelevant. Instead of submitting one proposal and awaiting verdict with anxious hope, submit 10 and continue working on the next 10. Rejection of any single work becomes statistically insignificant when volume is sufficient. Your strategy shifts from, "Will this succeed?" to, "How many can I create?" This shift makes retreat impossible because you are too busy creating to notice rejection. The rejection that would have devastated you when you waited upon a single verdict barely registers when you have already moved to the next creation and the next. I challenge you to undertake what I call the volume commitment. Whatever creative work you do, commit to tripling your output for the next 90 days. Not tripling the time spent, tripling the actual output. If you write 1 article per month, write 3. If you make 1 sales attempt per week, make 3. If you create 1 proposal per quarter, create 3. Document your rejection rate. You will discover that increased volume makes individual rejections psychologically manageable whilst statistically ensuring increased acceptance. A word of caution must be offered. Volume without quality is futile persistence. The principle is not to produce rubbish rapidly, but to produce quality work in sufficient quantity that rejection of individual pieces does not derail the enterprise. Another error deserves mention: treating rejection as instruction to change everything. Rejection tells you one person or group declined this work. It does not tell you your work is worthless. Distinguish between useful feedback that improves your work and mere preference that reflects only the rejector's taste. Your relationship with rejection has now fundamentally changed. Rejection no longer signals you to stop, it signals you to produce more. The fear of rejection is replaced by the strategy of volume. You become statistically immune to the devastating effect of individual rejections, because no single rejection can derail an enterprise built on consistent output. The creator's path is now clear. Produce more when rejected, not less. Establish volume targets that render individual rejection insignificant. Treat assessment as opinion, not verdict. Remain present whilst others depart, and inherit the field they abandon. We have seen the champion's conduct in commerce, in reputation, and in creative endeavor. The principles manifest identically across all domains. Now we must examine the deepest implications, what this understanding reveals about courage, fortune, and the nature of human existence itself. We come now to the deepest waters of our inquiry. Having established principles and demonstrated their application, we must examine what these truths reveal about the fundamental questions of human existence. We begin with courage itself. We commonly think of courage as the capacity to act despite fear, as though fear and action were opposites between which a man must choose. The courageous man in this conception feels fear as intensely as the coward, but overcomes it through force of will. He acts despite his terror, compelling his trembling limbs to move against their inclination. This conception is incomplete. It explains how some men act courageously in isolated moments, but not how others act courageously as a matter of course. It describes courage as exhausting struggle, but not as sustainable practice. But responsibility brings power. If your fortune flows from your presence, then you can improve your fortune by expanding your presence. If absence from fortune's distribution caused your deprivation, then presence can cause your enrichment. The same geometry that explains past failure illuminates future success. This is liberation. You are not fortune's victim, but its architect. Your choices about where to be present determine what you receive. Expand your presence, and you expand your fortune. The mathematics are simple and reliable. There is one revelation remaining. What happens when these understandings fully inhabit you? What transformation occurs when principles become not merely knowledge, but identity? The final chapter awaits. We arrive at the end of our journey, though in truth it is not an end, but a beginning. For the journey through these pages concludes whilst the journey through your transformed life commences. What remains is to understand what happens when these truths fully inhabit you. Once the eyes are opened, they cannot be closed again. This statement is not metaphor. It is precise description of what occurs when genuine understanding is achieved. You cannot unlearn what you have learned. You cannot unsee what you have seen. The principles we have established become permanent features of how you perceive the world. Once a man sees opportunity where he once saw only obstacle, he cannot help but move toward it. Once he understands that difficulty creates vacuum, he cannot observe difficulty without simultaneously observing the vacuum forming. Once he recognizes that retreat confirms accusation whilst advance contests it, he cannot face criticism without this knowledge shaping his response. The difficulty that tempts him to retreat has cleared the field before him. He knows this now. It has removed his competition. He knows this too. It has opened a path that was impassable yesterday and will be crowded tomorrow, but is today, in this moment, his alone to walk. This is the final transformation, from one who knows these principles to one who cannot act against them. Knowledge has become perception. Perception has become identity. The man who understands cannot choose to retreat, for retreat would require him to unsee what he has seen, to unknow what he has learned. I have shown you the truth. The mechanism is clear. The pattern is unvarying across all domains of human endeavor. The choice of what to do with this knowledge belongs to you. But I shall tell you this. I have never known a man who understood what you now understand and chose to retreat. For knowledge of this kind is not passive. It compels action. The man who truly sees that difficulty creates opportunity cannot watch opportunity being created and fail to advance toward it. His understanding makes retreat impossible, for retreat would contradict everything he now knows to be true. The irreversibility principle operates thus. Genuine understanding cannot be unknown. Once you see the mechanism, you see it everywhere. Once you understand that retreat creates vacancy and advance fills it, you cannot forget. The knowledge becomes part of how you see, as permanent as the ability to read once literacy is achieved. The compulsion of clarity follows inevitably. Clear sight compels action. When you see opportunity clearly, you move toward it. The only way to retreat is to cloud your vision, to forget what you know, to pretend you do not understand. This pretense becomes increasingly difficult as understanding deepens. You may try to retreat. In moments of weakness, you may attempt to unsee what you have seen. But the knowledge will reassert itself. The pattern will become visible again. The understanding will return, and with it the compulsion to act in accordance with what you know. The final stage is identity integration. These principles become not merely what you know, but who you are. You no longer think about them, you are them. Retreat becomes as unthinkable as any other act that contradicts your fundamental nature. Consider what lies before you. There will come a moment, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a month, perhaps in an hour, when difficulty will arrive at your door. You will feel the old instinct rising, the voice that says, "Stop, pull back, wait for better conditions." And in that moment you shall have a choice. But now you know what you did not know before. The difficulty has cleared the field. Your competition has fled. The path stands open to you alone. See it clearly, then walk. I challenge you to prepare for that moment now. Write a letter to your future self, the self who will face the next significant difficulty. In this letter, remind yourself of everything you have learned. Describe the mechanism clearly. Difficulty creates retreat. Retreat creates vacuum. Vacuum creates opportunity for whoever advances. Tell your future self what difficulty means and what retreat would cost. Remind yourself that nothing is preserved by retreat, that difficulty tells you about others, that maximum difficulty is maximum opportunity, that the habit of advancement must replace the habit of retreat. Seal this letter, open it when difficulty arrives. Let the letter speak to you with the clarity you possess now, before emotion clouds understanding. A final word of caution. Do not believe you have arrived at a destination when you have merely begun a journey. These principles require continuous practice. The transformation is real but not complete until repeatedly tested. Understanding in calm moments does not guarantee understanding in crisis. You may not remember everything when the storm arrives. This is why the letter matters. This is why practice matters. Preparation for clarity enables clarity when emotion would obscure. You are no longer the person who began this book. Your eyes are open, and they cannot close. Where you once saw obstacles, you now see selection. Where you once feared difficulty, you now anticipate it. Where you once competed against others' talents, you now compete against others' tendency to retreat. You have joined the minority who understand how advancement actually works. What you do with this understanding will determine everything that follows. I have given you what I can give, through words upon a page. The principles are complete. The mechanism is revealed. The path is illuminated. What remains is the walking, and this only you can do. Remember what you have learned. Retreat disguises itself as wisdom, but it is a lie. Walls are truly gates to those who push long enough. Each retreat reinforces the habit of retreat and compounds its cost. Difficulty creates vacuum, and vacuum creates opportunity. Your true competition is the human tendency to retreat, not the talented men arrayed against you. The darkest hour is the moment of maximum opportunity. Nothing is preserved by retreat. Difficulty tells you about others, not about yourself. Maximum difficulty is maximum opportunity. The habit of advancement must replace the habit of retreat through practice. In commerce, advance when others contract. In reputation, defend vigorously when attacked. In creative work, produce more when rejected, not less. Courage is the product of understanding, not the suppression of fear. Fortune flows to presence, not to vacancy. These truths are now yours. They cannot be taken from you. They will shape how you see every situation you encounter for the remainder of your days. The path that difficulty has cleared stands before you. The question is not whether you understand. You do. The question is whether you will walk. There is no next chapter. The book has ended. But your application of its principles has just begun. The field is empty. The vacuum awaits. The opportunity that others have abandoned lies ready for whoever advances to claim it.